Darkness pressed in on Jerusalem like a giant soul taking its final breaths. A man collapsed to his knees, his breathing broken and uneven, as if death itself were brushing against the back of his neck. Outside, an entire nation was unraveling its king dead, enemies closing in, faith decayed, everything collapsing in the blink of an eye. And in the midst of that desolation, a secret, a revelation never heard before, was about to be unveiled. You are about to witness the moment when God tears open the veil between heaven and earth, a moment so overwhelming that no human being could stand firm if they looked straight into it. A dim haze curled upward like the breath of something unseen. The young yet burdened face of Isaiah appeared in the faint light, then slowly dissolved into shadow, giving way to the image of an ancient scroll, trembling ever so slightly, as if it were about to open on its own. But the real question begins here. Why, out of all 66 books of the Bible, is Isaiah the only one called the gospel preacher of the Old Testament? Why would a prophet who lived nearly 3 millennia before us write words that Jesus himself quoted more than anyone else? And most importantly, why do those words seem not only to speak about the past, but to speak directly into our own time? There is something many readers skim past, but those who are awakened eventually notice. Isaiah was not merely writing prophecy, he was leaving behind a cipher, a secret code reserved for our generation, a message hidden in language, imagery, motifs, and structure, a crimson thread stretching from ancient Jerusalem straight to your eyes today. An old page appears, revealing a single line, a secret written 700 years earlier. To you every. The scroll trembles, then slowly turns toward the light, as if inviting the viewer to step into a story that stands outside of time. The wind suddenly changes direction, no longer the mournful groan of a panicked city, but a strange breath, sharp and powerful like a blade slicing the air. Isaiah stands alone in the heart of the temple as the darkness begins to recoil, pushed back by an invisible light. The heavy curtain that separated the most holy place trembled, only for an instant, but enough to make his heart tighten. Then, a faint sound, like a wing brushing against stone. Not the sound of a human, not the sound of wind. It was a sound that belonged to somewhere else. Light burst forth not from lamps, not from fire, but from behind the veil, the place no mortal was ever permitted to enter. Isaiah raised his hand to shield his face, but the light pierced through his fingers and struck directly into his mind. And then the sound emerged. Not a voice, not singing, but a chorus of layered tones, deep and thunderous, shaking him all the way down to the bone. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. Every word slammed into the air, making the ground beneath his feet tremble. Incense smoke rose and wrapped itself around the light, turning the entire sanctuary into a sea of golden clouds. Isaiah wanted to run, but his feet were pinned in place, caught between terror and awe. He did not know what he was witnessing, only that if he remained even 1 second longer, he might be consumed by that glory. It was the kind of moment no one could ever prepare, for a moment when heaven touched earth, and there was no escape for the human standing in between. But what Isaiah saw in that moment was not meant to be passed down as an ancient tale. It was a warning, a wake-up bell that no one, not kings, not priests, not ordinary people, could afford to ignore. Because if a human being could stand in that glory and tremble as if he were about to die, if a prophet could glimpse the future of an entire nation in the span of a single breath, if a vision could tear open human complacency, deception, and the masks of false righteousness, then that means this life holds far more than what your eyes can see. It means there is a thin boundary between peace and collapse. It means you might be drifting asleep in the middle of the clearest signs of decay within your very own generation. And if Isaiah was chosen to awaken an entire nation, then the message he left behind was never meant only for the 8th century before Christ. It is meant for you, right now, in the life you are touching every single day. If what you have just heard makes something inside you stir a curiosity, a faint trembling in the soul, then stay. The chapters ahead will open the very doors Isaiah once saw, doors that most of humanity has never dared to step through. And if you believe the world today needs wake-up calls like this, consider leaving a subscription. Just one simple touch, yet it helps us continue bringing profound biblical stories to even more people. Now then, take a slow, deep breath. Because from this point forward, we are not merely observing Isaiah. We are walking with him, entering his history, his fear, his collapse, and the moment he was given a mission that would change the direction of humanity. To understand Isaiah and to understand why his calling is truly a wake-up call for all of humanity, we must begin with the ground he was standing on, a nation shaking, a society decaying, a faith hollowed from within, and a future cracking open right before their eyes. Jerusalem at the end of King Uzziah's reign was not a place of poverty. On the contrary, it overflowed with prosperity. Marketplaces were filled with goods, vineyards stretched all the way to the horizon, and fortified walls convinced people that no enemy could ever break through. But prosperity, when it lasts too long, often carries a shadow with it, the illusion of safety. King Uzziah ruled for more than half a century, 52 years of stability, military strength, economic abundance, and achievements that made the people of Judah proud. Those who were born and raised under his reign likely never knew what despair felt like. They only knew one thing: Jerusalem is always fine. And that was exactly when everything began its collapse. Prosperity made people soft, stability made them complacent. What was once sacred law slowly turned into routine. What was once faith became habit. What was once reverence before God decayed into empty ceremonies, without heart, without soul. Isaiah, even as a young man, saw that change unfolding every single day. He saw merchants using dishonest scales in the marketplace. He saw the nobles grow rich on the suffering of ordinary people. He saw judges take bribes and twist justice. He saw priests perform perfect rituals, while their hearts were far from the Lord. He saw people burning incense to foreign gods right at the doorstep of the true temple. This was no longer the Jerusalem of David or Solomon. It was a Jerusalem of corruption, hypocrisy, and a fractured soul. That inner decay happened at the very moment a monster was rising beyond their borders. Assyria, the most terrifying empire of the ancient world, cold-blooded, ruthless, without mercy. The strongest cities of the Near East were falling one after another beneath the Assyrian sword. Rumors of horrific massacres spread everywhere, people exiled, skinned alive, impaled on stakes. Every nation knew, when Assyria marked someone as its target, there was no escape. Judah was dozens of times smaller than Assyria, and hundreds of times weaker. Yet the people of Judah were not afraid. They thought, Jerusalem has the temple, Jerusalem cannot fall. A belief that was true, yet twisted into arrogance. Isaiah was not a warrior nor a politician. He was a man of the temple of priestly lineage, strictly educated, raised among scripture, sacred ceremonies, and songs of worship. Because of that, the moral collapse struck his heart more painfully than anyone else's. Every time he saw his people deceive, argue, or cheat, Isaiah did not merely feel sadness. He felt pain, a deep, genuine pain that made it impossible for him to stand by and watch. But he did not yet know what he was supposed to do. He only knew there was always a quiet, distant calling inside him. One day, I will call you. And then, one day, it became reality. The day King Uzziah died. The news spread as fast as fire catching the wind. Fear swept through the streets like a ghost. Everyone understood that this death was not merely the end of a man. It was a sign, the warning of a collapsing dynasty, a collapsing era, and a collapsing spiritual wall of Judah. Isaiah moved with the crowd, filling the streets, hearing their anxious whispers. Assyria will come. Without Uzziah, we are abandoned. What will happen to our nation? And in that very moment, amid a trembling city, amid fear spreading like a fever, Isaiah walked into the temple, not to seek a vision, not to ask for a mission, not to become a prophet. He entered the temple simply as a man grieving for his country, as someone who felt the heaviness thick in the air, as someone who just wanted to pray long enough to catch his breath again. But God does not wait for the strong. He does not wait for the flawless. He waits for those who tremble when they see what is wrong. He waits for those who refuse to stand still while the soul of a nation decays. Isaiah was exactly that kind of person. The moment he stepped into the temple, amid the pillars, the incense, and the dim light, something no one had ever seen before began to unfold. What happened in the next few minutes would make Isaiah's entire life never the same again. It would transform a discouraged young man into the greatest prophet of the Old Testament. It would shake not only Judah, but the course of human history. Inside the temple, the air felt heavy, as if even the dust itself were waiting for something. Isaiah stepped forward, the light from the entrance slowly swallowed by the thick darkness. His footsteps echoed strangely, as though the very ground were listening for his presence. Incense smoke rose from the altar, curling into soft, ghostly rings, and at that exact moment, just as Isaiah opened his mouth to pray, the thick veil guarding the most holy place trembled. Once, then again, as if someone behind it were pulling gently with a force not belonging to the human world. Isaiah froze. His heart pounded so violently he thought it might burst through his chest. It was not fear, but something more ancient, a creature's instinct when standing before absolute power. Then the light appeared. Not the light of oil lamps, not the light of fire, but a white radiance so pure it made every other color meaningless. It shot out like lightning that refused to fade, spreading, expanding, overwhelming the entire sanctuary in unbearable brilliance. Isaiah wanted to turn away, but he could not. He wanted to run, but his feet felt nailed to the stone floor. The light widened, and he saw a throne. A massive throne towering beyond sight, wrapped in a brightness not born of flame, not born of the sun, but seemingly from the very existence of the one seated upon it. And then he heard the sound, not a human voice, not music, but a force that made stone vibrate, made the air tremble, and made his soul feel as though it might tear right out of his body. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Creatures with 6 wings flew around the throne, 2 wings covering their faces, 2 covering their feet, 2 in flight. They resembled nothing Isaiah had ever imagined. Each time they cried, "Holy!" The temple floor shook as if struck by an earthquake. Smoke poured out from the most holy place, rising, weaving into the blinding light like streams of molten gold. And in that moment, Isaiah understood he did not belong there. He did not belong in the presence of such absolute holiness. He did not belong in the moment where heaven collided with earth. He cried out in terror, "Woe is me! I am undone, for I am a man of unclean lips." Not the king, not the army, not the enemy. The first person Isaiah condemned was himself. He realized how small, stained, and unworthy he was before the Holy One. It was as if all the sins of the nation had gathered inside him: hypocrisy, pride, ingratitude, injustice, forming an invisible weight, crushing him to the ground. He could not breathe. The smoke felt as though it was forcing itself into his lungs, choking him. The light pierced his eyes with a burning pain. Then suddenly the light shifted, not fading, but moving aside. One of the seraphim swooped downward, gliding over the altar, taking a glowing ember with a pair of metal tongs. In that instant, Isaiah was certain he would die. No one survives when a heavenly being approaches with a coal burning hot enough to shine. But what happened next was the exact opposite. The angel touched the ember to his lips. A faint sizzle like the sound of cleansing. A sharp pain cut from his mouth straight to his heart. But immediately after came a strange relief, as if a massive stone had just been lifted off his soul. The angel said, "Your guilt is taken away. Your sin is wiped clean." The light softened. The smoke cleared. Jerusalem outside was still in chaos, but inside Isaiah everything suddenly became still simple, pure, like a blank page rewritten from the beginning. And then the voice spoke, not from the angel, not from the temple, but from the one seated on the throne, a sound so deep it struck not only the ears, but the soul itself. "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" It was not a command. It was not pressure. It was a question that made heaven and earth pause to wait for the answer of one small human being. Isaiah looked around. There was no one else. No priest, no king, no one more talented, no one more worthy, only him. And in that moment, something both natural and completely impossible, Isaiah answered, "Here am I, send me." Only 4 words. Yet those 4 words changed the course of history. But the silence that followed made Isaiah realize that agreeing was one thing. Understanding what he had agreed to was something else entirely. Then the next words came, and they were nothing like what Isaiah could have imagined. Not good news, not a promise of victory, not a miracle to revive the nation. It was a harsh mission. You will speak, but they will not listen. You will show, but they will not see. Their hearts will grow hard. You will cry out, and they will refuse. Those were not false words. They were painfully true. Isaiah stood still, his lips still burning. He understood. God was not calling him to succeed. He was not calling him to be praised, obeyed, or respected. God was calling him to become the final warning. Isaiah's voice trembled as he asked, "My Lord, for how long?" And the answer came like thunder, "Until the cities lie in ruins, until the houses stand empty, until the people are carried far away, until only a stump remains." Isaiah was stunned. A mission with no escape. A future as dark as ink. But then the one on the throne spoke one more sentence. A sentence that ignited a flame in Isaiah that would never go out. Yet, in that stump, a holy seed remains. A spark, a hope, a promise that even if Judah were to fall, the story of God would not. Isaiah fell to his knees. He understood. He had not merely been given a task. He had been entrusted with the future of humanity, a promise, a seed, a plan no one in his generation could possibly comprehend. When he stepped out of the temple, Jerusalem was still chaotic. But Isaiah was different. He carried in his eyes the light of what he had seen. A light that made people stop, stare, fear, or mock. They did not know. How could they know? That this man, still trembling, his lips burning, tears drying on his face, had just been appointed to awaken a nation sleepwalking toward the edge of a cliff. When Isaiah walked out into the afternoon light, it struck his face like an entirely new world. Everything looked the same, merchants calling out prices, children running, officials passing by with cold expressions. But he was no longer the same. Changes for stock. Inside him, the sound from the heavenly throne still echoed, a sound that made every human word feel too small, too weak, too false. He knew he had to do the first thing, speak the message he had been given. But to whom? How should he speak? Where was he supposed to begin? No mortal is ever taught how to carry a message from God to a nation that refuses to wake up. Isaiah took a deep breath and walked straight into the central square, the busiest place, crowded with merchants, nobles, soldiers, farmers, and priests, a place where every word could be heard or ignored. He stepped onto a stone and lifted his voice. His voice was not loud. He was not shouting, but it carried a weight, a depth, a resonance that seemed to silence the noise around him, as if it came from another realm. O people of Judah, hear the word of the Lord. E7 Timon. A few turned to look. They recognized him. A young priest, educated, not a nameless wanderer. Isaiah continued, You have ears, but you do not hear. You have eyes, but you do not see. Your hearts have grown hard as stone. You offer sacrifices, but your souls are far from the Lord. The atmosphere changed instantly. Silence spread, but not the silence of understanding. It was the silence of defensiveness. A merchant nearby let out a mocking laugh. Another holy man is born, I see. Well, resound. A woman selling grapes whispered, Listen to him, talking like we are the worst sinners in the world. An official narrowed his eyes. Who does he think he is to speak like that? But Isaiah did not stop. The message was far from over. He spoke about injustice, about arrogance, about their indifference toward the poor, about how they worshipped foreign gods, yet still considered themselves righteous. And then he spoke the one thing no one wanted to hear. If you do not turn back, this nation will fall. Immediately, the square erupted like a wildfire. That will never happen. Jerusalem is the city of the Lord. It cannot fall. What is he trying to do? Scare us? Grab power? What a lunatic! A small stone struck Isaiah's leg, but he did not step back. His eyes were still red from the vision. His heart still carried the echo of the divine voice. His soul had yet to recover from the overwhelming holiness of the temple. His first day as a prophet was also his first day being mocked. That evening, Isaiah returned home with legs heavy as stone. Jeremiah, his closest friend, who always stayed by his side, ran to the door. Isaiah, what did they say? How did it go? Isaiah sat on the doorstep, burying his head in his hands. No one listened. No one wants to listen. Jeremiah, they hate me, these Adasses. O2B2. Jeremiah stayed silent for a long moment, then replied, You already knew, Isaiah. You were told. He was right. Isaiah had known. God had been clear. They will not listen. But knowing is one thing. Facing it is another. He had just looked straight into the truth. His people no longer wanted to hear the voice of God. They had lived with prosperity so long that they were blind to danger, lived with ritual so long that they were blind to sin, lived with their own voices so long that they had gone deaf to the call from heaven. Isaiah let out a long breath, his voice almost breaking. They laughed in my face, Jeremiah. They said I am a destroyer of peace. Jeremiah sat down beside him. Isaiah, people who are fast asleep always hate the one who wakes them. The words struck Isaiah deeply. Yes, his mission was never to be loved. It was to awaken, no matter how much they despised him. A few days later, Isaiah tried speaking to the most difficult audience of all, the priests, the very people who should have supported him, but in reality were the ones who felt most threatened. He went to the temple and said, You offer bulls and sheep, yet your hearts are farther from the Lord than the nations around you. An elderly priest replied with a sharp, mocking tone, Isaiah, we have followed every law. Why would the Lord be angry with us? Isaiah looked directly into their eyes. Because you offer sacrifices, but not justice. The Lord is tired of empty rituals. He seeks a heart, not the blood of sheep. The priests froze, their faces turning red with anger. One shouted, "Silence! How dare you insult the temple?" Isaiah answered calmly, "It is hypocrisy that insults it." The air grew thick. They wanted to drag him out, but they could not deny what he said, because deep down they knew it was true, a truth they refused to face. That night Isaiah could not sleep. He remembered the light in the temple. He remembered the despair he felt when he saw the sin within himself. He remembered the words, "You will speak, but they will not listen." Before his calling, Isaiah was a man whose heart ached over the corruption of his people. After his calling, he became a man who carried that ache in every breath. He understood why God had warned him beforehand. Without preparation, this level of rejection could crush anyone, and it nearly crushed him. But in the darkness of the night, Isaiah looked up at the sky above Jerusalem, where thousands of stars shimmered like watchful eyes. He told himself, "If an entire nation rejects me, I still have the one who called me." That was the moment Isaiah chose to continue, even with a weary heart, even with trembling legs. Not because he was strong, but because he had seen what no one else had seen, and once seen, it could not be silenced. The next day he stood up, walked into the city, and began to speak again. News spread faster than the winter wind. The two northern kingdoms, Israel and Aram, were preparing an alliance to attack Judah. Merchants fled back to Jerusalem with pale faces, saying enemy armies were approaching the borders. Smaller towns began to empty, people scattered in fear like a flock shattered by a predator. Jerusalem had never been so afraid. But the most terrifying thing was not the enemy armies. It was King Ahaz who was trembling on his own throne. Ahaz was young, inexperienced, and driven more by fear than by faith. When news of war reached him, he immediately summoned his advisers to the palace. Voices filled the chamber. "We should seek help from Egypt. No, Assyria is stronger, beg them to protect us. Then send the temple's gold as a diplomatic offering. We's would dance too." No one spoke of seeking guidance from God. No one mentioned the soul of the nation. There was only panic. A court official leaned toward Ahaz and whispered, "My king, someone wishes to see you, Isaiah." The entire room fell silent. Isaiah's name was no longer welcome. Many hated him. Many saw him as a pessimist, a disturber of the city's fragile peace. But Ahaz, though he disliked Isaiah's warnings, did not dare ignore him completely, because Isaiah's words were frighteningly accurate. "Let him in," Ahaz said, his voice tight and strained. The great doors swung open, and Isaiah entered with a calm stride, his eyes as cold as steel. He had not come to negotiate. He had come to deliver a message. Ahaz looked at him with exhausted eyes. "Isaiah, you have come to bring bad news, have you not?" Isaiah answered without hesitation, "My king, I have come to speak what the Lord has spoken. With business roded business, which ours the not," the advisers murmured in irritation. But Isaiah continued before any of them could object. "Do not fear those two nations. They are nothing more than two smoldering pieces of wood. Their plan will not succeed." Ahaz blinked in surprise. A spark of hope rose in his eyes, but that hope was immediately swallowed by doubt. "How can I believe that?" Ahaz asked. "Everything points to our destruction." Over there, Isaiah stepped closer. "The Lord says that if you do not stand firm in faith, you will not stand at all." The entire room held its breath. To speak to the king like that! No one in Judah had such courage except Isaiah. Ahaz, wounded in pride, tried to keep his composure. "Then what does the Lord want me to do?" Sit quietly and wait for a miracle? Isaiah looked straight into the king's eyes. The Lord wants you to believe. Isaiah knew Ahaz was weak. He knew Ahaz's faith was too fragile to stand on the Lord's word alone. So God offered the king something extraordinary. Ask for a sign from the Lord, from the depths below or the heights above, anything. Every advisor was stunned. God, allowing a human to choose any sign, Ahaz was even more terrified. Not because he honored God, but because he did not want to be forced to believe. He said, with false piety, I will not test the Lord. Isaiah clenched his fist. He saw the hypocrisy clearly. Ahaz refused the sign because if a miracle appeared, he would have no excuse left to run to Assyria. Then Isaiah spoke words no palace had ever heard. O house of David, enough. You do not merely exhaust human patience. You exhaust the patience of my God. The air cracked like lightning. Ahaz's face burned red. The advisers panicked. The guards tightened their grip on their spears. For Isaiah to speak to the king that way, any other person would have been executed on the spot. But Isaiah did not stop. He raised his voice and declared a prophecy that would make the entire history of humanity tremble. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. A virgin will conceive and bear a son, and he will be called Emmanuel, God with us. The room fell utterly silent. A virgin giving birth? That was beyond anything anyone of that era could imagine. Some advisers burst into mocking laughter. Others exhaled sharply in fear. Ahaz was stunned not because of the prophecy itself, but because it shattered the political calculations he clung to. Isaiah looked directly at the king. That child will be the sign of a salvation far greater than any war. But as for you, Ahaz, you have chosen your path. He turned and walked away, leaving the palace swirling in anger and confusion. News of the prophecy spread through Jerusalem like fire catching dry grass. Isaiah says a virgin will give birth. Impossible. Nonsense. He has lost his mind. Or, what if? What if it is truly a word from heaven? Most mocked. Some trembled at his warnings of destruction, but no one was indifferent. Isaiah became the center of every conversation, from the marketplace to the royal court. One day, as he passed through the market, a group of young men jeered, "Hey, Isaiah, so when is Emmanuel coming? Let us know early so we can prepare gifts." They burst into laughter, as if they had heard the greatest joke. Isaiah looked at them, his eyes not angry, only sorrowful. He answered, "You may laugh, but the word of the Lord does not change." The mockers only grew louder. But what wounded Isaiah most was not the rude young men. It was his own family. One evening, a relative named Eliab came to see him. Eliab, usually gentle, arrived with a face full of tension. "Isaiah, they are calling you a troublemaker. You are bringing shame on the entire family. People argue because of you, and they avoid us just because we share your name." Isaiah asked calmly, "Then you want me to stay silent?" Eliab slammed his hand on the table. "Yes, you should stay silent. We cannot take this any more." The words cut like a blade. Isaiah looked down at his hands, still marked with the faint burn from the ember the angel had pressed to his lips. And he understood this was the price of speaking truth in a world that preferred comfort over honesty. Isaiah whispered, "I cannot. I have seen what I cannot remain silent about." Eliab shook his head in disappointment. "Then from now on, do not expect anything from me." He walked out. The door closed, leaving Isaiah in the dim room, lit only by the flicker of an oil lamp. Jeremiah sat behind him, quietly witnessing everything. Isaiah. He wanted to say more, but no words came. Isaiah looked up, his voice breaking. Even my own family thinks I am mad. Jeremiah, I am beginning to understand why the Lord said they would not listen. Jeremiah placed a hand on his shoulder. But the Lord did not tell you to stop. Isaiah nodded. No, he never told me to stop. Well, gutted. A few weeks later, as the political situation grew worse, Isaiah went to see Ahaz again. Not in the palace, but outside the city walls, where the king was inspecting the fortifications. When Ahaz saw Isaiah, he scowled. You again? I do not need another prophecy. But Isaiah spoke directly. You have chosen to trust Assyria. You have sent the silver and gold of the temple to them. You will regret this. Ahaz turned away sharply. I am doing what is necessary to protect the nation. Has Vint sighed, Tui Lod, and come sound. Isaiah's voice thundered. No, you are selling the soul of Judah in exchange for a few years of false security. Assyria will not save you. It will devour you. The commanders surrounding the king exchanged frightened glances. Some were angry, but Ahaz, though weak, was far too proud to accept truth. He waved his hand. Remove him from here. But Isaiah did not move. He delivered one final sentence. But Emmanuel will come, and he will establish a kingdom that no earthly king can destroy. Ahaz stopped walking. He did not understand, but he knew. Isaiah's words would not disappear. They could not. That night, Isaiah walked through the quiet streets. Cold wind swept across rooftops, oil lamps flickered. He knew the coming years would be filled with hardship, collapse, war, and tears. But he also knew this: the prophecy of Emmanuel had been planted, a paradox of a seed, born of a virgin, bearing the name God with us, coming as a sign no one was ready to receive. The people of Judah could laugh. King Ahaz could resist. His family could turn away. But that seed had entered history. And one day, not next year, not in Isaiah's lifetime, but many centuries later, that seed would bloom. Isaiah lifted his eyes to the night sky, the moon hanging at an angle above the rooftops. He whispered, My God, I believe. To his eyes, and the wind seemed to answer. The wind shifted, not the ordinary wind, but the wind of history beginning to move. In the weeks following the confrontation between Isaiah and King Ahaz, Judah began to fracture exactly as Isaiah had warned, slowly but surely, like a crack pushing deep into the foundation of an ancient temple. Bad news flooded the capital. Aram has taken another district. Israel is gathering 10,000 soldiers in the north. People are abandoning their villages. Okay. And while the nation drowned in despair, Ahaz walked a completely different path. He sent envoys carrying gold, silver, jewels, and even sacred objects from the temple to Assyria, begging for protection. Something Judah had never done in its entire history, seeking help from foreigners right before the face of the Lord. When Isaiah heard the news, his heart twisted as if pierced by a blade. One foggy morning, Isaiah walked through the central gate of Jerusalem. There were no conversations, no children playing, no laughter left. People moved like shadows, heads lowered, afraid to look one another in the eye. A woman walked past with a small child in her arms, crying silently. Isaiah stepped toward her. What troubles you? She did not look up. They have called my husband to the battlefield. He is weak. I know he will not return. Isaiah wanted to speak a word of comfort, but his lips trembled. He knew there would be many more like her, so many that the streets of Jerusalem would not be wide enough to carry all the grief. In the distance, a few men whispered, Isaiah was right, disaster has truly arrived. But he also said there would be a sign, a child born of a virgin. Who could ever believe such a thing? Isaiah heard every word. He did not turn back, but his heart tightened. That night, as Jerusalem sank into darkness, Isaiah sat alone in his small room. The oil lamp cast trembling patches of light across the walls. Jeremiah knocked at the door. "Isaiah, I did not see you today. Are you well?" Isaiah did not answer right away. He placed his hand on the table where the scrolls lay open. A gentle breeze flipped a page, as if an unseen hand had stepped inside. "Jeremiah," he said softly, "the Lord is calling me again. This time—" "About what?" Jeremiah asked, his voice heavy with concern. Isaiah looked at his friend, his eyes burning with an unusual light. "Not about the war, not about Ahaz, but about a child." Jeremiah froze. "The child Emmanuel?" Isaiah shook his head. "No, another child. A child who will reign." As Jeremiah struggled to catch his breath, Isaiah stood up and stepped out onto the porch, where the moonlight stretched across the ground like a river of silver. He closed his eyes, and a light, not physical light, but the light of revelation, flooded his mind. He saw a land covered in darkness, a people living in fear, a people walking in the shadow of death. And then a light appeared on the horizon, small as a candle at first, but growing stronger, spreading wider, pushing back every trace of darkness. Isaiah whispered, "A great light." Jeremiah almost stopped breathing. "What light?" Isaiah opened his eyes and spoke as though the words did not come from his lips, but from God himself moving through him. "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given. The government will rest upon his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." Jeremiah staggered backward, stunned. "Isaiah, are you saying that a child will be the mighty God?" Isaiah exhaled heavily. "That is what I was shown. In the imagination of Judah, a savior had to be a warrior. Tall, strong, sword raised, leading armies into battle. But Isaiah had seen something completely different. A child. No sword, no warhorse, no army. Yet upon his small shoulders, the government. Jeremiah sank onto the doorstep, holding his head in his hands. A child, not a king. Yet he will rule. How can anyone believe that? Isaiah looked toward the city of Jerusalem, its dark stones, its pillars casting long shadows. "People do not need to believe." "Not now," he said, "because it will not happen today, nor tomorrow. But I know that when he comes, this nation and the entire world will tremble." But the brilliant vision had barely lifted their spirits when reality crashed down again. A young soldier ran into Jerusalem shouting, "Urgent news! Aram has seized 2 more fortresses, and Israel is marching troops toward Judea." Chaos exploded. People ran in every direction. Cries and screams filled the air. Isaiah stood in the street like a pillar of stone in the middle of a storm. Jeremiah asked, "Do you have any words to calm them?" Isaiah looked at the frantic crowd. "Yes," he said, "but they will not listen." "What about King Ahaz?" Jeremiah asked. Isaiah closed his eyes. "He has chosen his path, and the consequences will come." The messenger returned from Assyria with news. "Tiglath-Pileser III has accepted the alliance. You need only send more gold from the temple and become a vassal of Assyria." Some people rejoiced. "We are saved." But those who understood turned pale. Becoming a vassal meant Judah would lose its freedom, lose its identity, lose its soul. Isaiah stood in the marketplace, watching the joyful crowd. "They do not know the price they are paying," he whispered. That night, Isaiah recorded the vision of the child king. Every word trembled on the scroll as if it carried breath. Jeremiah sat beside him, silent for a long time before finally speaking. "Isaiah, Even though people hate you, even though the king rejects you, even though the nation is falling apart, you still believe. Isaiah set down his pen and looked at his friend with a depth that felt endless. I believe, because I have seen. Seen what? Isaiah lifted his face, the moonlight casting over him. I have seen a future no one will believe. I have seen light inside the darkness. I have seen a king who will come not with weapons, but with a heart capable of carrying all humanity. Jeremiah went still. Isaiah closed the scroll. This chapter, though Judah is collapsing, will not be the final chapter. The collapse is only the clearing of the path. And when everything becomes pitch black, light will rise from a child. Darkness grew heavier over Jerusalem, not only in the sky, but inside the hearts of the people. The weeks that followed brought bad news again and again, not in waves but like a storm that never stopped. Border villages were burned to the ground. Refugees streamed into the capital until the alleys were as crowded as narrow cracks in stone. Their faces carried only two things: exhaustion and fear. Isaiah walked along the uneven stone street, seeing fathers carrying children home from military posts with bewildered eyes. A young soldier, barely old enough to hold a spear, sat slumped against a wall, his hands trembling. When Isaiah knelt to ask, the soldier replied in a hoarse voice, "We do not have enough men, we do not have enough strength, we do not have enough hope." But Jeremiah, walking just behind Isaiah, whispered, "They do not realize they are not only fighting an enemy, they are fighting the abandonment of the Lord that their own king chose." Isaiah said nothing. He felt another calling inside him, a familiar whisper rising again like a wind gathering strength before a storm. That night, as the oil lamps dimmed, Isaiah sat alone in his small room, the window slightly open as cold wind carried the fading sounds of a restless city settling into uneasy sleep. He closed his eyes, and immediately a vision struck him. A man. Not a king, not a warrior, not a leader. A man of ordinary appearance, his head bowed, his shoulders thin as though bearing an invisible burden. But what stopped Isaiah's breath was the man's face, a face full of wounds. Isaiah snapped his eyes open, gasping for air. But the image did not vanish. It stayed etched into the space before him, clearer than the flame of the oil lamp. The man's eyes, they were not the eyes of someone afraid, nor the eyes of someone angry. They were the eyes of one who could endure. Eyes that understood the pain of humanity more deeply than humanity understood itself. Isaiah gripped Jeremiah's hand, trembling. I saw a man," he whispered. "Who?" Jeremiah asked. Isaiah drew a long breath, his voice dragged down by an invisible weight. "A man who suffers for everyone," Jeremiah frowned. "A king? A leader?" Isaiah shook his head. "No, a man despised by his own people." Rever. In 14s, as soon as he spoke, a fierce wind slammed against the room. The oil lamp wavered, the flame jerking as if it too were terrified. And then, as though God had opened the door to another realm, a torrent of images crashed into Isaiah's mind. The man was being shoved through a crowd. They screamed into his face. They threw dirt. They hurled insults. Some turned away, not out of disgust, but because they could not bear to look at someone else's suffering. Isaiah clutched his head. Why is it an innocent man?" he choked. But the next image was even more horrifying. The man was tortured. Every blow tore through the air. His back split open, blood mixed with dust. Each drop fell to the ground like a silent cry. Isaiah broke instantly into tears. "My God, enough," he whispered in despair. "I cannot watch any more." But the vision did not stop. Now Isaiah saw the man led away like a lamb toward execution. No resistance, no shouting, complete silence, a silence that made humanity's guilt pierce even deeper. "Jeremiah," Isaiah said, his hands shaking uncontrollably, "I see him pierced, I see him crushed, but not for his own wrongdoing." Jeremiah's face went pale. "Then, for whom?" Isaiah could not speak, but the words burst from him on their own, a small thunderclap in the stillness of the room. "For us." He covered his face, sobbing like a child, not because he was afraid, but because he understood. The suffering of this man was deeper than any prophecy ever spoken. Then another scene exploded before him. A hill, a rough piece of wood. The man's hands nailed to the wood with metal, unlike anything Isaiah had ever seen. Each strike sounded as though it tore through the heavens. Jeremiah collapsed to the floor. "Isaiah, a man nailed to wood? Judah has no punishment like that." "Not from Judah," Isaiah whispered weakly. "A punishment from the future." But goading, he nearly fainted. But God did not allow him to stop. Finally, Isaiah saw the man's body, lifeless. Those around him walked away. Some cried, some mocked, some could not look at all. Jeremiah turned his face aside, unable to bear the sight. Isaiah cried out, "This is the one who bears the sins of the world." But what overwhelmed him most was not the death. It was what happened after it. In the instant, everything turned to darkness. Light suddenly burst forth. Dim at first, but growing brighter, sharper, so radiant that Isaiah had to raise his hand to shield his eyes. The man stood upright, alive. His face still carried the marks of suffering, but his eyes, those eyes, were no longer the eyes of a condemned man. They were the eyes of one who had conquered. Isaiah fell backward, both hands pressed to his chest, as if trying to steady his heartbeat. "He rose," he whispered, dazed. Jeremiah panicked. "What? Isaiah? That is impossible." "But I saw it," Isaiah nearly shouted. He rose to bring life to many. The room was swallowed in a sacred silence, as if even the air itself had bowed down. Isaiah collapsed to his knees on the cold stone floor. A sentence slipped from his lips, not in his voice, but in the voice of heaven. "By his wounds we are healed." Jeremiah stood frozen, no breath, no words. Isaiah continued, each word trembling as if passing through his very soul. "He will see his offspring, his days will be prolonged, and the purpose of the Lord will prosper in his hand." Jeremiah had never heard anything like it in his life. Isaiah bowed low, his forehead touching the ground. "Jeremiah," he whispered, "I have seen the redemption of the world." Jeremiah swallowed hard. Redemption, but through death? Isaiah answered in a voice like the breath of a flame, "Through a love stronger than death." The two men sat in that darkness, neither speaking another word. Outside, Jerusalem slept, unaware that in a small room, without kings or soldiers, only two trembling men, a prophecy had been written, the greatest prophecy in all the Old Testament. A man who suffers, a man who bears sins, a man who dies, a man who rises. The entire world would shift because of that moment. But no one in Jerusalem knew. Only Isaiah, late in the night, looked toward the horizon and whispered, "He will come. He will surely come." The next morning, a heavy grey sky settled over Jerusalem, so thick it felt like a curtain of stone hanging above the rooftops. The city woke in its familiar chaos. The cries of widows, the wailing of hungry children, the bleating of goats dragged away as war tax. Gatekeepers watched from the walls with hollow eyes, as though their souls had left their bodies days ago. Isaiah stood among the crowds, watching their weary faces pass. He knew what they were waiting for: a word of comfort, a reassurance, a hint of hope. But he could not lie to them. He could not speak what the Lord had not spoken. An old man, hands trembling, tugged at Isaiah's robe. His eyes were sunken, worn down by too much despair. "Isaiah, tell me, when will all this end? When will the Lord show mercy to us?" Isaiah held the man's frail hand, but he could not answer, not because he did not want to, but because he knew the truth would be too heavy for exhausted hearts. At that moment, whispers swept through the streets like a dust storm. "Assyria is here! Their army has entered our territory." A chill ran down the spine of the city. People stared at one another, eyes wide, like animals cornered by a predator. Jeremiah murmured, "They are paying the price for Ahaz's choice." Isaiah turned his gaze upward toward the grey sky. Not only Ahaz, but a whole nation that forgot the source of its protection. That night, as the sun sank behind the walls, darkness did not just fill the alleys. It poured into the very heart of Judah, a night so heavy that every sound felt strangled, every hope buried under a suffocating weight. In Isaiah's small room, Jeremiah paced like a trapped animal. "I cannot take this any more, Isaiah. The Lord shows you glorious things, but why? Why does he also show you Judah crushed? Why not give a way out now?" Isaiah sat at the wooden table, hand gripping the scroll. Not every word the Lord speaks is meant to prevent pain. Some words are given to prepare for restoration. Jeremiah stopped. Restoration? Where? Everything is falling apart. Isaiah closed his eyes. He was so exhausted that his lips trembled when he spoke. Only in darkness can light find room to rise. Jeremiah sighed, ready to respond. But Isaiah suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze was sharp as a blade, piercing the night. "The Lord is calling me." Jeremiah recoiled in fear. Right now? In a moment like this? Isaiah did not answer. He rose to his feet, breathing deep and slow, as though receiving an invisible weight. His whole body trembled, like an instrument being tuned. Then the vision struck, swift and violent like lightning. Jerusalem lay in ruins. Walls collapsed. Fire towered into the sky. The sound of weeping scraped against Isaiah's heart like metal grinding on stone. He saw bodies in the streets, shattered homes, children wandering like hollow shadows. Isaiah gasped, bracing himself against the table to keep from collapsing. Jeremiah rushed to him. "Isaiah, what are you seeing? Tell me." Isaiah could barely breathe. Each word came out as if torn from his chest. The Lord is showing me the darkest day of Judah." Jeremiah shuddered. And what else?" Isaiah shut his eyes tightly. And in the darkness of that dreadful vision, a small light flickered, fragile, but impossible to extinguish. At first, only a spark. Then it grew, spread, cut through the night like a blade of fire, tearing every strand of despair apart. Isaiah's eyes flew open, and he inhaled as if rising from deep water. "I see him," he whispered. "Whom?" Jeremiah croaked. "The one I saw before, the child, the man of sorrows, the one pierced, crushed," Isaiah said, his hands trembling. "He appears again, not in suffering, but in glory." Jeremiah stepped back in disbelief. "Isaiah, what are you saying?" Isaiah stood upright, his eyes glowing like embers. "I see him comforting the broken. I see him healing the hopeless. I see him freeing the captives. I see him placing a crown of joy on those who once wore ashes." Jeremiah clung to a pillar to keep from falling. "You are saying, he will come After the collapse, Isaiah nodded. In the ruins, he will rebuild. In the vision, Isaiah saw the fallen lifted up. He saw ruined cities restored from the foundation. He saw the blind receive light. He saw the oppressed rise and sing songs Judah had forgotten. Then he saw himself declare the words that every prophet dreamed of proclaiming, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom to the captives, to announce the year of the Lord's favor." Isaiah was no longer trembling, no longer crying. He spoke with an otherworldly peace, as if his heart were standing in the center of a flame without being burned. Jeremiah stared at him, tears forming. "Isaiah, will we live to see that day?" Isaiah did not answer immediately. He placed a steady hand on Jeremiah's shoulder. "Perhaps not, but Judah will, and the world will." He looked out the window. The sky was still gray. The air still tasted of ash. But in Isaiah's eyes, light had begun to rise. "Jeremiah," he said slowly, "even when darkness covers the earth, the Lord prepares a light. That light is coming, and it will come in a way no one expects, not in strength, not in war, but in a man, a one the world will not anticipate." Jeremiah whispered, "Who?" Isaiah closed his eyes, as if listening to a voice from another realm. "The Messiah." Outside, the cry of an infant pierced the night. No one knew that this faint, fragile sound lost in the wind and the terror of a trembling city was the kind of sound that would someday open a new chapter, the chapter of hope. Isaiah opened his eyes, exhaled long and slow, and whispered, "The night is long, but dawn is coming." In the days that followed, Jerusalem became tight as a bowstring stretched to its limit. The people were anxious, the soldiers exhausted. King Ahaz clung to Assyria like a drowning man grasping any passing piece of driftwood. But the worst thing was not the war outside. The worst was the dying soul within Judah. The priests of the temple began to feel the pressure, not from the enemy, but from Isaiah's words. Isaiah did not hesitate to say that their rituals were empty shells, that the Lord despised sacrifices without repentance, that their faith had become a dry skeleton of tradition. One morning, Isaiah walked across the temple courtyard as he did every day, and immediately sensed something different. No one came near him. The priests who passed by looked at him with cold, cutting eyes, as if he had defiled the holiest place of the nation. A young priest, face flushed with anger, marched straight toward him. "Isaiah, do you even know what you are doing? You accuse us of hypocrisy. You condemn our offerings. You insult the very temple itself. Who gave you that authority?" Isaiah looked at him not with anger, but with a quiet heaviness. "I speak only what the Lord has spoken." "Okay, the Lord?" the young priest nearly shouted. "If the Lord truly spoke, why would he not speak through us? Why through you?" A crowd began to gather, their eyes curious, furious, or afraid, fixing on Isaiah. An elder priest stepped forward, his long silver beard swaying, his gaze sharp as stone. "Isaiah," he said slowly, "you are destroying the faith of the people. You are sowing fear. You are shaking their trust in the temple, in the rituals, in the very things the Lord commanded our fathers." Isaiah answered softly, yet firm as a mountain, "It is not I who shake them. It is hypocrisy that shakes them. It is your indifference that leads them astray." A wave of angry murmurs rose. The elder priest hissed through clenched teeth, "Silence." But Isaiah did not stop. He could not. He lifted his hand and pointed toward the altar, where smoke curled upward like a white ribbon. "You burn incense, yet your hearts are thousands of miles from the Lord. You stand near the altar, yet you stand farther from him than the nations outside our gates." The air froze. The young priest shouted, "Get out of the temple, From afar, Jeremiah ran toward him, yelling, "Isaiah, come on! They will harm you." But Isaiah remained where he stood. A strange silence fell over the courtyard, as if heaven itself was waiting for one more word. Isaiah turned slowly, looking across the entire temple court. His voice fell low, drawn out, heavy with grief. "If these words make you angry, then you have proven me right." The crowd flinched as though slapped. No one answered. Isaiah walked out of the temple, slowly, like a man carrying the weight of the whole city on his shoulders. Jeremiah caught up to him, breathless. "Are you out of your mind? They will strip you of your position. They will accuse you of blasphemy." Isaiah did not look back. "I know," he said, "but if I stay silent, the stones will cry out." Jeremiah froze. It was not just a statement. It was a verdict on the soul of the city. That evening, Isaiah returned home. The wooden door closed behind him, but loneliness stood inside the room like a towering figure needing no door to enter or leave. He sat on his familiar wooden chair, but his heart felt as heavy as stone. "My God," he whispered, "why do you leave me alone?" No voice answered. Only the sound of wind seeping through the cracks and distant footsteps of patrolling soldiers. Then suddenly Isaiah felt his heart tighten, not from sorrow, but because he sensed what was coming. A new vision, but this time it did not come like light. It came like a grey storm, twisting straight into his mind. Isaiah gasped sharply, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Jeremiah panicked. "Again? Isaiah, tell me, what do you see?" Isaiah could not speak immediately. He shut his eyes and let the vision pull him in like a violent current. He saw abandoned cities, fields with no one left to plow them, children wandering with empty eyes, men being led away like prisoners with no future, women sitting by the roadside, hair tangled, faces pale, clutching the last child they still had. Jerusalem conquered. The temple burned, the proud walls collapsing like sand. Jeremiah knelt beside him, his voice trembling like cold wind. "Isaiah, what is this? Is this our future?" Isaiah opened his eyes. Tears fell, but those eyes, they were seeing beyond pain, seeing something deeper, farther. "Jeremiah," he said, his breath unsteady, "I see this nation taken into exile. I see them weeping by foreign rivers. I see them hanging their harps on willow branches. Land lost, home lost, hope lost." Jeremiah whispered, "My God." Isaiah continued, his voice cracking like faint thunder. "But I also see. He is still with them, in foreign lands, in their sorrow, in their humiliation." Jeremiah wiped his eyes. "Then, will they ever return?" Isaiah nodded. "Yes, but not by their own strength. They will return because of the one I have seen, the man of sorrows, the child, the Messiah." My closed. Jeremiah swallowed hard. "And what do you see about that day?" Isaiah stood and walked to the window, staring into Jerusalem's darkness. But he no longer saw Jerusalem. He saw an age centuries ahead. "I see a king, not sitting on a throne of gold, but sitting in the hearts of the poor. I see a temple, not made of stone, but built from hearts returning to the Lord. I see a people no longer divided, but gathered into a kingdom that will never fall." Jeremiah stood frozen. Isaiah continued, his voice slow but unwavering. "I see him pour out his spirit. I see the hopeless lifted up. I see nations that were once enemies coming together to seek his light." Then he turned toward Jeremiah. There was no darkness left in his eyes. There was a strange brightness, the brightness of someone who had seen the depths of suffering and the heights of glory. "Jeremiah," he said softly. "The future does not belong to the empires that rise and fall. The future belongs to him." Jeremiah asked, his voice small, as if afraid to break the moment. "Him? Who is he?" Isaiah closed his eyes. A faint smile appeared on his lips, sorrowful yet radiant. "You already know. I have told you many times." And he whispered, "The Savior." Outside, Jerusalem remained buried in darkness, in weeping, in collapse. But inside this small room, a tiny light had appeared, a light of promise, of certainty, of a future that could not be destroyed. A light no empire, no enemy, and no darkness could ever extinguish. In the years that followed, the land of Judah changed color, not into the green of harvest, but into the gray of decay. The stone roads where children once played became the paths of refugees. The markets once filled with shouts of trade were reduced to whispers of fear and the scent of hunger. Assyria grew like a beast that never slept, and King Ahaz, once hoped to bring Judah peace, became the victim of his own fear. He did not seek the Lord. He did not listen to Isaiah. He listened only to the frantic beating of his own heart, and ran straight into the arms of the mightiest enemy. One morning, the people of Jerusalem awoke to dreadful news. King Ahaz had sent immense amounts of gold and silver from the temple as tribute to Assyria, in exchange for protection. That act was like a blade stabbed straight into the soul of the nation. Isaiah heard the news in silence. Jeremiah stood beside him, pale. "Isaiah, this is like selling our soul." Isaiah pressed a hand to his forehead, closing his eyes as if holding back a deep, piercing pain. "Yes," he whispered, "Ahaz is selling the very throne of David." Not long after, Assyria arrived, not to protect, but to show who the true master was. From the city walls, the people of Judah saw an army black as a rolling sea, chariots of polished iron, spears long as the ribs of a giant beast. They did not attack Judah. They did not need to. Ahaz had already knelt long before. Isaiah stood on the high steps near the temple, watching that vast army, and his heart felt as though it were being torn in two. Jeremiah spoke softly. "If Ahaz had listened to you from the beginning." Isaiah interrupted. "It was never about listening to me. It was about listening to the Lord." Years passed, and fear became the rhythm of daily life. Countless new laws were enforced. Worship grew blended and polluted, mixed with foreign rituals. In the Temple of Jerusalem, Ahaz ordered an Assyrian-style altar to be built, a profanity unimaginable to any Israelite who still held reverence in his heart. Isaiah stood before the new altar one late afternoon. The wind pulled at his robe, carrying with it the mocking laughter of priests who had accepted this new path. Jeremiah asked, "You will not speak?" Isaiah answered, "There are moments when silence itself is a prophecy." The older Ahaz became, the more fearful he grew. The more fearful he was, the more desperate he became. And the more desperate he became, the farther he ran from the Lord. At last, on a night soaked with heavy rain, King Ahaz died in a loneliness that even the poorest in the city rarely endured. No one wept. No grand funeral was held. The people whispered only one sentence: "Perhaps he has finally found what he never sought during his life." When the news reached Isaiah, he remained silent for a very long time. Jeremiah watched him, waiting for something: a word of judgment, a word of mercy, a warning. But Isaiah spoke only one sentence, light as wind but heavy as stone. He chased Assyria all his life, but Assyria has never saved anyone's soul. Then, something no one expected happened. The throne was empty, and the one to inherit it was the son of Ahaz, a 25-year-old young man named Hezekiah. Hezekiah was nothing like his father. From the very first day on the throne, he shocked Jerusalem with a decision no one had dared to imagine. He destroyed the Assyrian altar in the temple courtyard. The smashing of stones sounded like the cracking of a long-asleep conscience. Isaiah stood at a distance watching Hezekiah, never having met him, but knowing instantly. This was a different man than Ahaz. Jeremiah asked, "What do you see in him?" Isaiah answered, "I see a spark, but a small spark is the easiest for the wind to extinguish." Hezekiah did things that generations of kings had feared to do. He shut down the high places of pagan worship. He restored the Passover. He called the entire nation, even the scattered tribes of the north, to return to the worship of the Lord. One morning, Hezekiah sent messengers to find Isaiah. Isaiah entered the palace without fear. Hezekiah rose to his feet as soon as he saw him, a gesture almost no king ever offered. "Prophet," Hezekiah said, "I have read your words. I have heard what the Lord said through you. I do not want to walk the path my father walked." Whiz and quote. Isaiah looked into the king's eyes, clear and sharp, like someone who had known much darkness yet kept a flame alive within. "What do you desire?" Isaiah asked. Hezekiah replied, "I want to bring Judah back to the Lord, but Assyria, they will not let us." Isaiah smiled very faintly, a smile nearly invisible. No one can prevent what the Lord has decided. But Hezekiah did not know that what awaited him was not merely reform. It was a trial so great that all Judah would tremble. One day, dreadful news rushed into Jerusalem. Assyria had conquered nearly all the northern kingdom of Israel. Samaria, the capital of their own blood brothers, was destroyed. Tens of thousands were led away into exile. Jerusalem shook. Hezekiah turned pale. Jeremiah could barely breathe. Isaiah simply looked at the messengers and said, "What I told you long ago is now unfolding." Months later, the worst happened. Assyria, the strongest empire of that age, with an army that had never known defeat, surrounded all of Judah. They captured every fortified city. One by one, each fell under their crushing feet. The people fled in panic to Jerusalem, sealed the gates, and trembled like a small bird trapped in a storm. Hezekiah paced the palace corridors night after night without sleep. He prayed. He wept. He sought Isaiah. "Prophet," Hezekiah cried, his voice breaking, "we are surrounded. No city remains, no allies, no reinforcements. What must I do?" Isaiah did not answer immediately. He looked toward the city walls, where the torches of Assyria burned like hundreds of demonic eyes in the night. Then he turned back and said, "King Hezekiah, you are afraid because you look at Assyria. Now look at the Lord." Hezekiah furrowed his brow. "But, Isaiah, they are as numerous as the sand of the sea." Isaiah replied, "That number is not equal to even one breath of the Lord. It say," his words stretched the air tight like a drawn bowstring. Hezekiah did not know how much faith he possessed, but he did know one thing. He would not be like his father. He would not run to Assyria. He would run to the Lord. And from that moment on, the fate of Judah turned a page that no human power, no army, no strategy could solve. A page that could be opened only by the intervention of the divine. Hezekiah drew in a long, steady breath and said, "Isaiah, I believe." With given man. Outside, the war drums of Assyria began to thunder. The earth seemed to tremble. No one in Judah could sleep. But inside the palace, for the first time in many years, Isaiah smiled. Not because the situation was good, but because he knew a great miracle was coming. A miracle the world would speak of for thousands of years. As this journey reaches its final moments, pause for a breath and look back at what we have just walked through, because Isaiah was not simply telling a story. He was opening a doorway, allowing you to see what humanity needed centuries to finally understand. You witnessed the moment a trembling man stood before the throne of heaven, when the veil between heaven and earth was torn open. That was not an illusion. That was the day a human being looked straight into the center of holiness. You heard the prophecy of a servant, wounded, despised, beaten, pierced, yet silent like a sacrificial lamb. A figure too clear to deny, yet far too early for the people of Isaiah's time to comprehend. You saw the sign of a child born of a virgin, a prophecy that defied every logic. And yet, 700 years later, it unfolded exactly as it had been written. You witnessed the dual fulfillment of prophecy, words partially fulfilled in the days of Isaiah, yet stretching far beyond his lifetime into a future he would never live to see. And above all, you heard the warning Isaiah sent to every generation. Do not sleep in fear. Do not bow to human power. Do not lose the one who alone can save. Isaiah is not just a book. It is an alarm, and it has just sounded for you. Now that you have walked through the entire journey of Isaiah, the most important question is no longer, what did he see? It is, what is it saying to you? Because Isaiah was not sent only to the people of Judah 2,700 years ago. He is also standing before you, placing his hand on your shoulder, asking a question that sounds gentle, but cuts into the deepest part of the soul. Where are you asleep? It might be in fear. It might be in exhaustion. It might be in confusion, in doubt, or simply in the kind of familiarity that dulls the urgency of faith. Ask yourself 4 questions Isaiah wants you to face. What part of your spiritual life has become numb, like the people of Judah, hearing but not hearing, seeing but not seeing? What are you placing your trust in instead of the one who alone can save? Reputation, money, a relationship, control? Are you resisting a small prompting that the Lord keeps bringing to your heart, the same way the people turned away until their hearts grew hard? If the Lord asked, "Who will go for me?" would you still have the courage to answer like Isaiah, "Here I am, send me"? If you truly want to awaken from within, do not let this moment touch you, only to let it fade. Begin with 3 steps, gentle but powerful. 1. Pray no need for poetic words. Simply say, "Lord, please wake me up. Wherever I am asleep, call me to rise." 2. Repent not in guilt, but in honesty. Choose one thing you know you must let go of, or one thing you know you must start doing. Write it down, place it before the Lord. 3. Act small but sincere. Read 1 chapter of Isaiah each day. Stop one habit that is hardening your heart. Do 1 act of justice for someone who needs it most. And if you want to understand Isaiah on a deeper level, pay attention to 3 things as you read. The repeated lines, because Isaiah is incredibly intentional. The strong images, light, roots, burning coals, darkness, valleys, high mountains, these are codes, not decorations. The sudden shifts from judgment to hope, from darkness to light. That is the place where the heart of the Lord is revealed, because reading Isaiah is not studying an ancient text. It is an awakening, and once your eyes are opened, you cannot return to sleep. If the journey of Isaiah has stirred something in you, then this is not the ending. This is the point where you rise and step into your own part of the story. Because no one is awakened in order to remain still. Awakening always carries a calling, and that calling is not distant. It begins right where you are, in your community, in your family, in your workplace, in the conversations that seem small. Isaiah was alone for much of his life, but you are not. You have a community being built out of people who are waking up little by little, just like you. If you want to step deeper, begin with a simple but very real challenge, the 7-day Wake Up Call Challenge. For the next 7 days, each day do this. Day 1 to 2. Read one chapter of Isaiah and write down one thing that moved your heart. Day 3. Do an act of justice for someone who has been forgotten. Day 4. Pray for someone you know who is drowning in inner conflict. Day 5. Release one burden that has been weighing down your heart. Day 6. Share a small story about how the Lord has awakened you. Day 7. Listen for where the Lord is calling you to go, just as he called Isaiah. If you have an experience, a testimony, or a question, share it. Not just because, but because one honest story can become a wake-up call for someone else. Every person carries a part of this calling. No one is too small. No one is too late. No one is nameless. An awakened community can change an entire city. And it begins with you. And then, when every prophecy, every vision, every sorrow and every hope lines up into one continuous river, you will realize. Isaiah is not only the story of a prophet, it is the story of you, of a human being standing between darkness and light, between fear and faith, between calling and the silence of one's own heart. Because if Isaiah saw glory when he was only a trembling man before the throne of heaven, then you can see it in your own life as well. Awakening is not a sudden explosion. It is a small movement, quiet and steady, yet powerful enough to break everything that once held you captive. Imagine the heavy clouds of confusion slowly dissolving, and through that haze, a thin but sharp beam of light breaks through and touches the earth. It does not call the name of a city. It does not call the name of a nation. It calls your name. The voice lowers deep and slow. Isaiah is not merely history. It is a calling. And now, that calling is reaching toward you. How will you respond? Light spreads, then a dark background. Words appear, one stroke at a time. Rise. Believe. Proclaim. If this journey has touched you, I invite you to stay with us. Hit subscribe so you will not miss any of the stories to come. Click like if you want many others to be awakened just as you were today. And leave a single comment. I am ready. Where's we, Mars blees withers, Mars blees. Not for the algorithm, but so you can mark a moment. A moment when you chose to walk with Isaiah, more awake, stronger, and closer to the Lord. And remember to turn on notifications, because the next journey is on its way.